Miyuyam, everyone. My name is Angela Mooney, DRC. I am a Hashiman. Our ancestral homelands are in what's now known as Orange County, California. I'm coming to you right now from unceded Tongva homelands in what's known as Los Angeles, California. It's a real honor to be here. I'm grateful to know the Haudenosaunee and the Onondaga people. They've been good relatives to my family and my people over the years, and so it's an honor to be here and be a part of this important conversation that folks in these nations and others started a long time ago in the international realm. So I always like to start any presentation that I do, even on Zoom, by orienting us to where we are in terms of California. And so this is a map of the tribal nations, territories, in what's now known as California. I like to use this map, even though there are many maps out there, because this one was designed by a California Indian traditional basket weaver named Tima Loda Link. She's a Chumash basket weaver, and she's also a graphic designer. And so I think it's important for folks to understand that despite the centuries of violence and genocide and attempted genocide on our peoples, we continue to be resilient and assert our sovereignty and our own relationship with place today in a multitude of ways. I also always like to start by including information about where I'm from. This is a map that appears in my nation's tribal museum in San Juan Capistrano. And so it's a map of areas that are now known as Orange County. But as you can see on the slides there are also the names of the villages, Uchme, Ashame, Putitum, some of the places that my ancestors called home prior to European settler colonial invasion. And again, I like to share this because I think too often outsiders don't understand that Indigenous peoples are here and alive and resilient today. They only understand us as existing in the past. And my advice to anyone who is concerned about the future of our planet and the climate and the future of humanity is look to Indigenous peoples, because the resilience that it takes to hold on to names of places in languages that the colonizer tried to beat out of our people for generations is a profound resilience, and I think everybody can benefit from that. This is a little bit more context of Southern California lands. There's our neighbors to the north are the Tongva, our neighbors to the east are the Luiseño, and to the south, the Kuya. And again, where I'm coming from talking to you today is in Tongva homelands, and as you can see, just as my people do, the Tongva also have a multitude of place names that they retain for their nation's village sites. This next slide is a tragic slide, and one that I imagine is a map that is all too familiar to many Indigenous peoples. This is the literal route of colonization, the route that the Doctrine of Discovery took in what's now known as California. It's called El Camino Real, which is otherwise known as the King's Highway. It's important to note that this route actually existed prior to Spanish settler colonialism. It was an ancient Indigenous trade route, and so there was trade amongst Indigenous sovereign nations throughout the Americas on this route since the beginning of time. But all that changed, of course, when colonization via the Doctrine of Discovery invaded our homelands under the guise of missionization and Christianity. But really, as you can tell from this route, these are all sites of strategic military significance as well, because they're on the coast and they're port sites. Really, this slide breaks my heart. And the first time I read about this, it made so many things fall into place for me as an Indigenous person from a Southern California nation. And that is that you can see the level of devastation that occurred in Alta California, which is what we now consider California, happened in the span of 70 years, or a single lifetime. That same amount of ecological devastation and change took over 300 years to accomplish in Mexico. And so I think it's really important for people to hold in their minds that this first onslaught, really, it's true. We talk about Doctrine of Discovery as Mother Earth's pandemic. And it was absolutely a pandemic on my people's land, because in the span of a single human life, our landscape was dramatically and almost irrevocably altered. I also think it's important to highlight the ways in which Doctrine of Discovery continued to evolve in California and the United States via this concept of manifest destiny. And this quote that's up here is a quote from the first governor of California under U.S. rule. And as you can see in the slide, he explicitly called for the extermination of California Indians. And this was in his first gubernatorial address. And so as many of the speakers before me have addressed, I think it's really critical for folks to understand that the doctrine of Christian discovery and domination doesn't just live in the past. It manifested, very clearly throughout settler state, private and institutional violence and calls for genocide of Indigenous peoples, and still does today. This slide, the picture on the left is the data of all of the dollar amount that private militias in California who formed these militias to hunt and kill Indian people, the amount of money for reimbursement for those murders of Indian people that they requested from the state of California. And what you can also see on this slide is the amount of dollar amount that the United States government reimbursed the state of California. The slide on the right shows what that dollar amount would be in present day dollars, and it amounts to about $14 million. So if we were talking about this today, we could say that the state put forward in the span of just a few short years over $14 million of reimbursement to private individuals who were out hunting and murdering California Indians with very much the intent of our extermination. And so what does it mean today in the context of, COVID-19, in the context of all the mobilization for Black lives and social justice? What does it mean today to know that these states have this ill-gotten history? This slide, I think, speaks to also what a lot of the other speakers have talked about over the course of this conversation, which is the relationship between the doctrine of Christian domination and extractive industries, because really it's all about money, right? It's about economic extraction. And so the slide on the left is a map put together by NRDC and Frac Tracker that documents where most of the extractive oil industries are in the state of California. And you can see where the yellow is where it's upwards of 1,000 or 10,000 new wells being put in. And those areas, as I'm sure you can tell from the map, they coincide with that route, with El Camino Real, the King's Highway. They absolutely, this map of extractive industries coincides with the map of colonization as it came through California. And so I think that shows very clearly, one, that the economic extractive domination was absolutely tied to the rhetoric of Christian soul saving. It wasn't really about that, as we know. It was about the economy. The slide on the right is a very painful slide, but also a powerful slide. My people are ocean people. We're coastal people. We look at all of the creatures in the ocean as our relatives. This is the case for most, if not all, coastal nations in California. Many of these nations have stories about different sea creatures and their relationship as relatives or family members. In my own nation, there are specific songs that we actually, by protocol, were and still are required to sing anytime we see a whale. And so the fact that there's a set of songs and actions and ceremonies to guide one's interaction with these creatures demonstrates a relationship, right? A familial relationship. And so you can see here in this slide really the jarring effects of colonization, of settler colonialism, and the doctrine of discovery, because those are offshore oil rigs right behind the whale. And so what does it mean? It's not just humans who have been impacted by the doctrine of discovery, right? It's our plant and animal relatives as well, whose lives have suffered and continue to suffer under these extractive economies. This is a quote from one of my elders, L. Frank Enriquez, who's an amazing person, powerful artist, two-spirit, linguist, singer, an incredible person in our community. And she says, reflecting on Los Angeles, because she's Tongva and Hashiman, it's difficult to be Indian under any circumstances. Think what it must be like to see a phenomenon like Los Angeles spread over your meadows and valleys, diverting your rivers, building parking structures on your holy sites, transforming the land that nurtured your ancestors into something unrecognizable. And I feel like this could be a quote from any Indigenous elder anywhere in the continental United States or around the world, because this is the devastation that colonization brought on all of our communities and continues to wreak havoc. I wanted to connect this also to the global pandemic, COVID-19, that's happening right now, and reflect for a minute on actual disease in Indigenous communities. And as I think many of the panelists have addressed, the rate of disease and the rate of death as a result of European diseases via colonization was astronomical and awful and painful. In California alone, more than 37,000 California Indians died at the hands of the missions, and about half of that was as a result of disease. What the slide doesn't indicate, but what the evidence does show, is that one of the most prevalent diseases that resulted in the death of California Indians was syphilis. And so what that tells you as well is it speaks to the current pandemic of violence against Indigenous women. It is very much the case that the massive deaths of California Indians were related to the rape and infection of Indigenous women via the soldiers carrying syphilis from Spain. And so now I want to talk about something that I've not actually heard folks talking about much in California, but as a California Indian from what's considered a non-federally recognized tribe, has been something that's been on my mind a lot during COVID. And that is, what are our immediate needs and concerns around our relationship to place, particularly as landless tribes whose ancestral homelands are in what are now considered urban areas. So I have a friend who's from another coastal tribe in California, and she told a story of one of her tribal members who was harassed and interrogated by police when she went to the ocean to do a prayer offering during the pandemic. And I have felt that loss of not being able to access my sacred places as well. There was a video, many of you have probably seen it. I think it went worldwide. There's a phenomenon in the coastal waters where the phytoplankton becomes, it glows, it becomes bioluminescent at night. And that happens every few years because of the red algae. And so that's been happening in my homelands, coastal waters, during the pandemic. Maybe a month or two into the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders in California, in Newport Beach, a couple of, settler men who had wealth and a private boat were able to go out on the water and film. It was beautiful. I was glad to be able to see it, especially during the pandemic. And they filmed dolphins in the bioluminescent waves. And while those images were beautiful, it was also heartbreaking to me, because the story of that bioluminescence and the creatures in the ocean being our relatives, these are sacred stories, and we have ceremonial obligations to land and place and ocean. And the idea that during this pandemic, when Indigenous people, people of color, economically exploited people are hit hardest and most severely by COVID, the idea that even in the midst of this pandemic, the stay-at-home order, wealthy white settlers were still able to access the beauty of nature in my homelands when myself and other people couldn't, was just really striking. And so one of the things that Safer Places Institute, the organization that I founded in 2012, has been working on is we've been trying to be in conversation with local governments and state governments about this issue, and about ways that the settler state can do more to try to at least acknowledge and accommodate Indigenous needs to access our homelands. And that, to me, the fact that we can't is one of the most poignant examples of the long-lasting impact of doctrine of discovery. We're in the midst of this global pandemic that we did not cause, and Native folks, by and large, when you read the stories and hear the interviews, are acting respectfully and acting appropriately and maintaining protocols and social distancing and caring for our elders. So, we're not the problem. But again, we are the ones who are harmed and whose, movements are regulated and restricted because of this harm wrought by colonization. And so we've been trying to make sure that elders and traditional cultural practitioners can have access to plant medicines, can have access to the ocean, to natural streams, to places where they need to be, because the ceremonies that our people conduct related to place are for the world. They're for everyone. And so for our people to not be able to do that because of these stay-at-home orders and because other folks aren't being cognizant and respectful of our need to work together and cooperate and be in community, once again, we're facing those harms. And so I'm sure my time's probably about up. I wanted to end with a reflection on what we can do moving forward from here. And so I'm going to rely on a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Charles Sepulveda, who is also a Hashiman and Tongva. And it's from an article that he wrote called Our Sacred Waters, Theorizing Kuyum as a Decolonial Possibility. I encourage all of you to read it. It's available to download for free online. And it's really about grappling with this reality of what it means to be Indigenous to a place that everyone wants to come to, and where you've been, where the erasure of your people via the doctrine of discovery has been perpetuated for so long. So Kuyum is the Tongva word for guest. And ultimately what Dr. Sepulveda, comes to as a conclusion in his article is, an intervention for how we can decolonize is for folks, settler colonists, to first ask how they can be a good guest on Indigenous homelands. And though that's a Tongva word, and we're applying that in, the context of Tongva and Hashiman homelands, I think really it's a question that translates worldwide. I think that if all, descendants of settler colonists and contemporary settler colonists were asking themselves the question regularly, how can I be a good guest on this nation's homeland, we would have a very different world. And so I encourage people to think about that, and always think about how to be a good guest on Indigenous homelands, because I think ultimately that's what the doctrine of discovery was trying to undo. It was trying to undo and erase other ideologies that placed community and sharing and care above extraction and wealth. And I think when we can ask the question, how are we a good guest on Indigenous homelands, it brings us closer to that world that we had and can still have, again, outside of this settler colonial system of domination. And so the final slide here is a picture kind of illustrating for me in my work what that looks like. And the slide on the left is of my colleague and friend, Maura Sullivan. She's Chumash, and she's a linguist. And here she is in regalia leading an action to protect her coastal homelands and waters. And I think this is exactly how it should be. It should be Indigenous people taking the lead on their own terms in the context of their culture, and it should be other folks stepping up to support that leadership. The slide on the right is of Jessica Calderon and Annie Mendoza and Annie Mendoza's son, Michael Mendoza. And this is on what's now known as the Santa Monica Pier. It's iconic. It shows up in all kinds of movies, and I'm sure you've seen it and have maybe even been there. But this is a moment where they were able to take that space back. And so I like to conclude with this as well, because as I said, I am on unceded Tongva homelands. And I think it's important for us to remember that we do this not just because of the obligations we have since the beginning of time, but we do it for our future as well. So thank you very much for this opportunity to be a part of this really important conversation. And you can reach me at this address if you have any questions or would like to continue to talk about these subjects.